Mark Vandermaas was just a regular guy doing a regular job selling real estate until he witnessed what he believed to be a tremendous injustice taking place in the country he loves. This injustice stood in such stark contrast to his understanding of what Canada is and was. It spurred him to want to act against it. As a former member of the Canadian Forces who had served with the United Nations peacekeeping force in the Middle East, he had personally witnessed the remnants of war and was determined to see that this kind of chaos would never come to Canada. Mark is one of those rare people who suffers great indignation at the existence of injustice, whether or not he is the direct victim of that injustice. So he suddenly found himself on the front lines in Caledonia, standing up for law-abiding citizens and demanding that the authorities do their jobs. Mark put his real estate career on hold to become a full-time volunteer rule of law activist, working to bring a permanent end to race-based policing in Ontario. Mark has consistently spoken out on behalf of Aboriginals, victims of OPP racial policing practices in both Caledonia and Ipperwash, as well as for the non-Aboriginal residents who represented the majority of victims. The significance of the presence of Hamas and Hezbollah flags and anti-Israel groups working with radical native groups right from the beginning of the problems in Caledonia was not lost on Mark. He quickly understood that this was a battle that must be fought on several fronts. And as a supporter of Israel, Mark began to reach out to advocates working in related issues, encouraging partnerships and the pooling of resources so collectively our presence would be greater. Mark's great energy and dedication is the reason we are all here, finally doing something about the lies of Israeli Apartheid Week, instead of just talking about it. We owe him a great debt of gratitude for always being willing to fight against the apathy that he knows we cannot afford. He's like the mother that keeps trying to wake up her lazy teenager to go to school. It's a thankless task, and lest he forget, let's show him just how appreciative we truly are for his incessant and sometimes annoying calls for us to wake up. Please join me in welcoming and thanking Mark Vandermaas.
This presentation is called Why I Carry a Palestinian Flag in My Pocket, a UN Peacekeeper's Case for Israeli and Palestinian Victims of Hamas. In 1978, I served as a United Nations peacekeeper in the Middle East, where I climbed Mount Sinai to watch the sun come up on Easter Sunday before Israel returned the Sinai to Egypt in a land for peace deal. I saw the burned out tanks in the desert and drove through the minefields. And the road took me through the Gaza Strip before Israel withdrew in yet another effort to achieve peace. Her reward was, of course, thousands of rockets targeted at innocent civilians, attacks that continue to this day. My parents lived under Nazi occupation in Holland. My father escaped from a Nazi work camp. They saw Jews taken away. And one of the most important lessons I learned from the Holocaust, and there are many that have guided me in Caledonia, is the onerous duty we all have as human beings to speak out against injustice, especially when it does not affect us directly. During this afternoon's session, I explained the circumstances that led to the Israel Truth Week concept, but tonight I'd like to tell you about the summer of 2011, when Jews and non-Jews, many of whom are in this room tonight, I'm honored by their presence, came from as far away as Hamilton to support what I called my Blue Beret Vigil, and Richmond Hill too, I think. I discovered that a London mosque had held a fundraising dinner to support the Canadian boat to Gaza, and its operations manager was traveling as a so-called delegate on this shameful expedition. An expedition which, if successful in breaking the blockade of weapons against Hamas, would make it possible for terrorists to obtain more weapons with which to kill more Jewish civilians, and would result in death and injury to more innocent Palestinians due to the need for Israel to defend itself against these war crimes. And I should point out to you, the fact that it was a mosque was completely irrelevant to me. It could have been a United Church, it could have been any other religious institution. It just offended the core of my being that a religious institution in this community would support an effort that would ultimately result in the deaths of Jews and Palestinians. So for 1 hour, I said, what can I do about it? I said, well, for 1 hour a day, for 26 days, I stood. And my plan was to stand there every day for an hour until that miserable boat, the people on it, got back into Canada. Of course, they snuck back into Canada because they never got to carry out their devilish mission. So I was there for 26 days. I was almost always with supporters, with my UN flag. We could, next slide. That's me in Egypt. That's I'm third from the right. That's me in Egypt. Next slide. That's a view from Mount Sinai on Easter Sunday. Next slide. Or sorry, next slide. That's the Gaza Strip covered with sand. Next, please. And those are the stars that my parents saw in Holland. And next. And next. And there. We'll stick there for a bit. So that's me, standing there with my blue beret. You can see my UN flag that's sitting right there. I'm holding a sign, and my sign says, "Fact, Israel was created by 1947 UN vote. Also, fact, UN condemned the genocidal Hamas charter in 2006. Did you know?" A lot of people really hate the UN. I understand that. But you know what? What we do in Caledonia is we use the left signals against them. And the UN, whether we like it or not, led to the creation of the modern state of Israel, and it did condemn the Hamas charter in 2006, whatever other ills that it has done. So I stood there, and my goal was to remind people that of this simple fact, because I'm a simple guy, of this simple fact that the UN passed a resolution in 47 that led to the creation of Israel. So on the base of my UN flag, I placed a small Israeli flag. You can see it there. And somebody asked why I didn't have a Palestinian flag. So I created a handout. I thought it was a really good question. So I created a handout to help people understand, and it was called "Why I Carry a Palestinian Flag in My Pocket," because I started carrying one every day of my vigil, just in case somebody wanted to see it. So here's an excerpt from it. Some of you on the anti-Israel side might wonder why I don't have a Palestinian flag. After all, if I'm claiming to be conducting my Blue Beret protests for the benefit of both Jewish and Palestinian victims, why not put their flag there too? And you might argue, am I not supposed to be neutral as a peacekeeper? Well, the UN's primary mission during peacekeeping is to protect civilians and work to restore the rule of law. I will never be neutral in the face of people like Hamas, who intentionally target innocents as part of a deliberate plan to exterminate a race of people and destroy a member state of the world community, especially when that state was actually created by UN vote. I understand it wasn't a binding vote, and there are some legal, it's not legally binding, but nobody can seriously argue today that the UN decision did not result in the creation of the modern state of Israel. So, that's on the side. Neutrality in the face of violence directed at innocents can never be neutral. It is siding with evil. In fact, neutrality demands that one take a side, on the side of truth, on the side against those who believe such violence is an alternative to the rule of law. The UN Human Rights Commission in 2006 condemned the Hamas Charter for its call to kill Jews and obliterate Israel. But the Palestinian Authority is just as guilty of inciting Jew hate among citizens on a daily basis. In my recent letter to the editor of the Hamilton Spectator, I think we can move on to the next one. Oh, and here's some scenes from the people who came out to support my Blue Beret protest. Next. Next. Some of these people are in the room tonight. Next. And there we go. We'll stop there for a second. That's my letter. So here's part of what I wrote to the Hamilton Spectator. They actually published it. History proves that land is not the issue. Rabid, genocidal, anti-Semitism is the issue. If readers have any doubt of this, I suggest they visit the site operated by Palestinian Media Watch, palwatch.org, and review the day-to-day glorification of violence against Jews in Israel, even in the children's programming. It is nothing short of nauseating, as you can see. I argue that for Palestinians to be recognized as a state by the UN, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority need, at the minimum, to demonstrate by their words and actions that they have completely renounced the use of violence against Jews. They have acknowledged Israel's right to exist in peace as a Jewish state and ceased teaching Jew hate to their citizens. Unfortunately, the so-called moderate Mahmoud Abbas made it clear to the Arab League in 2010 that he was completely in favor of another war to destroy Israel as long as other Arabs joined in. Quote, "If you want war, and if all of you will fight Israel, we're in favor, but the Palestinians will not fight alone because they don't have the ability to do it." He said that at the Arab League summit. In my opinion, if the UN declares a Palestinian state, or recognizes it, created on the backs of Palestinian war crimes, I use those words deliberately, a genocidal Hamas charter, and the wistful dreams of war against Israel by the Palestinian Authority before these conditions are met, it would represent a crime against all humanity for the future victims it will create by legitimizing the use of violence against innocents as a tool of politics. Even if the Palestinians are successful in convincing the UN to declare a state for them without clear proof they have renounced violence, it will be a hollow victory. It will precipitate more violence, and it will be an eternal stain on the United Nations that can never be erased. This week I purchased a small desktop Palestinian flag that I now carry with me during my protests in my pocket. When Palestinian leaders do make the historic decision to reject violence and hate against their Jewish neighbors, I will be very proud to place their flag beside the Israeli one underneath my UN flag. And that's the end of my letter, or my handout. Since writing these words, I've had the privilege of meeting Mossab Hassan. Next, please, sorry. There we go. I've had the privilege of meeting Mossab Hassan Youssef, author of the book, Son of Hamas, which tells the remarkable story of how he, the son of a Hamas founder, rejected the hatred of his Islamic environment to eventually become a Christian, and how he worked to save Palestinian and Israeli lives as an informer for Israel's Shin Bet security service. In his remarks, Youssef made a most astute and pithy observation when he pointed out the naive approach to the Middle East taken by those who refuse to acknowledge the root of the issue, when he said this: "The West is looking for a political solution to a religious problem." Youssef, a man who should know better than any of us, confirms the view that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is actually a very simple one to understand. Very simple. Palestinian leaders fervently believe in genocidal, supremacist violence founded in Islamic teachings, and are engaged in the wholesale inculcation of this ideology into Palestinian society with the goal of destroying the Jewish state. With respect to the United Nations, it seems cynical, disingenuous, and tragically ironic to me that Arabs turn to the very organization that helped create Israel to seek the legitimacy they have always denied Israel. And so I will close by repeating my assertion as a simple former peacekeeper that allowing the United Nations to recognize a Palestinian state which has not renounced the use of violence against innocents would be a terrible crime against humanity. Thank you.